Hello there and welcome to Beyond the Realm. I'm so glad to have gotten the overwhelming support I did about this podcast, and I'm really glad to be doing a second episode where with me today I have a illustrious guest, Jack Hoyle.
Howdy there.
It's a pleasure to have you on.
It's a pleasure to be here.
And today, I'll rush to the topic because unfortunately we don't have current events like Beyond the Realm, or Ring, rushing into it. Today's topic is going to be all about selective breeding and some of the more defective breeds out there. And it feels only fair to start off with the breed that Jack and I both know very well because they live in both of our houses, if I'm not mistaken. The French and American Bulldogs.
Yes.
So what's your experience with them?
So we've raised some dogs in the past, but most of my experience came from working at the vet clinic. My dad was a veterinarian, and there are few things that are as bad at being alive as French and English Bulldogs are. They can barely birth their own children. They cannot stay alive on their own for the first couple weeks they're alive. And from that point forward, they have a multitude of health issues throughout the rest of their life. So there's not a whole lot they really have going for them. People think they're cute. I think they're quite hideous. But yeah, no, definitely. If there was a defective breed, I would say they would be one.
I think the closest thing I can compare them to is something between a toad and a gargoyle with the way they sit. Like you just see the way they try and sit or stand. And sometimes
Oh yeah.
They're just sitting on the couch. Just last night, I was sitting on the couch. There was no activity. It was just lying on its side like a dog does. And it starts hacking along.
Yep.
No provocation. Just coughing and wheezing. And I really can't think of... My mother, she thinks they're the cutest things in the world. And I think it's maybe one of those ugly, cute situations. My own personal theory is that human brains are wired to like the faces of babies. They want big ears, big nose, recognizable eyes, high forehead. That's wired into people to like that or those features. And I think French Bulldogs are some caricature of those features. Think about it. A little snub nose, big ears, a high forehead from that flat muzzle.
I definitely think there is something to that. And I mean, that's a lot of humans' relationships with animals is just like seeing parts of ourselves within them. And I think that would be such a strange way for that to kind of show itself in the way that French and English Bulldogs have turned out. And like even past the facial structure and all that, like just the entire build of their body is so strange, and their like musculature is laid out in a very odd pattern.
It all stems from, like, the bulldog was first bred for, as the name implies, like bull baiting, where you'd set a dog on a bull and try and see which one came out on top. So you can understand why they're stout and had that short jaw to really get a good bite grip on that animal, but it's kind of fallen to the wayside in pursuit of just that smashed in face.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's going to be a pretty big theme carrying throughout this episode here is just really specific traits that were bred in and then kind of faded away from their original intended use. Like they're just leftover things that now don't function anymore. At one time they might have been functional, but it's kind of gone away from what it once was.
Yeah, that's a great point. You got any other points you'd like to make about the Bulldogs? Because I think you just hit the nail on the head between the C-sections, being unable to breathe. I mean, you can't leave one of the things outside in the summer for 5 minutes. It's like a bubble child.
It is really bad. And like I had worked with some breeders before doing some promotional stuff, and one of them, they sent me one of their like big stud dogs to get a video of, and they just wanted to like get a video of it running around, and it like had an allergic reaction to the grass outside, and it almost choked to death.
No.
It went outside. Like they're pitiful creatures.
These are like the bubble boys of dogs.
They really are.
If you had a child that couldn't go outside, it's called a bubble child. You would not propagate that because, oh, it's cute, it stays with mama forever. No, that's a horrible monstrosity you've made dependent upon you.
Oh, and see, I think that's a good point. The dependency. I think that's something that people really latch onto with the Bulldogs is a lot of them are people who kind of have like jobs that aren't too difficult. They're able to keep their life going pretty well. They want something that has to depend on them so they can kind of get that satisfaction of keeping something alive and getting like that reward.
I think it does fall that. My mom, she treats them like they're her babies. Like there's some times where I look at Stella, she's probably mom's favorite, and I think, does this dog have more emotional value to me more constantly than I do? Because I think when Katie and I leave for college, there is a chance these dogs may get a higher spot in the will.
Oh, I think it's a real chance.
I would not bet money against it because she loves those dogs and she calls them outright her children. And when there's babies, she dotes on them. It is
Oh yeah,
bizarre. And I love them because a dog, you can't not love a dog. But all
exactly.
I can think is that whenever she breeds a new litter of them, all I can think is, why could we not? You don't have to exterminate them, of course not. But maybe you could just try and breed in something with a little more muzzle. Maybe it wouldn't look like that perfect French bulldog you want with those character human baby features, but it'd have a higher quality of life. It could
That's
survive
a fact.
outside. It would not have snaggle teeth like they do. Like the snaggle teeth on them is just so bad.
It's atrocious. It really is.
And their skulls, like I saw the skull structure of a French bulldog, and it is like under the flesh and cartilage and all that. It is horrifying
It
on a
really is.
different level. Not just
And
snaggle teeth, but like it's like their face. The easiest way to describe it is like a Q almost. It's awful.
it's just not a shape that you would think a natural skull should be.
Exactly. And there's sometimes nature produces some pretty weird things, but this is dysfunctional on another level.
Yes. Wasn't nature. This one was all us.
The funniest thing is I saw that picture of a French bulldog skull next to a wolf skull, and the difference is uncanny.
I couldn't imagine.
Yeah, we've thoroughly shredded the bulldogs, and I love them to death as sweet animals, but really I feel a true ethical dilemma in trying to breed them without trying to do some work to bring that muzzle out. Because there's some breeders of not bulldogs, but pugs who are trying to make these retro pugs, which are pugs from a time when their muzzle was a bit longer. If you look at old paintings of them, so they're bringing in some
Yes.
other breeds to extend that muzzle, like the Jack Terrier or Jack Russell Terrier, rather. And my thought is maybe you could try that with French bulldogs. Maybe they wouldn't look like the classic ones you know and love, but they'd certainly be more survivable. But yes, without further ado, you got anything else you'd like to say about French bulldogs or American
I,
bulldogs?
I think that might be it on the Bulldogs.
Well, that's perfect because you brought up a great topic earlier about how we selected for a very specific feature a long time ago, or at least humans did. And as time went on, that feature just became almost an aesthetic thing. And that's great when talking about Great Danes. The Great Dane was originally bred in, big surprise, Denmark, for boar hunting. It had loose hide, a big frame. It was meant for bringing down wild pigs. And it did pretty good at that job. And being so big, it was able to take on such ferocious, large game. But nowadays, that size has become nothing but like a status symbol of like, look at how big my dog is.
Yep.
Some people want big lifted trucks. I guess some other people want dogs that look like you put wooden stilts in their legs.
See, and the Great Dane's such an interesting one because they do have a variety of medical issues, but they're much more functional than the Bulldogs wound up being.
Yes,
And they're way less popular as a breed.
indeed. Like the Great Dane, on a surface level, yes, it is very, or at least a lot more functional, but from everything I've found, that big frame leaves them with all kinds of skeletal problems as they get older. That's why they have that notoriously short lifespan of 5 to
Yeah.
7 years in comparison to the average dog lifespan of what, 10, 12, 13 in some cases. I think we got a dog in our garage going on 14.
There was very rarely any Great Dane I saw come into the clinic that didn't have some sort of joint issue or bone issue or structural issue. They're just too big to live a sedentary life. They need to be active. They need to be working to build the muscle that keeps them in proper form. And the life they live these days doesn't keep them in that form.
So that's the main problem, that they were built for an active life and they just aren't getting that workout they need.
Mm-hmm.
That's interesting.
They're overbuilt for the lives that they're living, and that's what really ends up giving them so many joint and bone issues. I think so.
So if you did have a Great Dane, you would need to constantly be working that thing. All right. Any other big notes about the Great Danes that you've seen from your time?
I mean, not too much else. They generally are pretty calm. They aren't very aggressive animals. I've never had like an issue with one trying to bite me or being rude. They're just hard to have around because they get in the way of so much. I knew a lady who had one as a pet, and she ended up breaking her hip because the dog ran into her and tripped her. It didn't try to. It wasn't running anywhere. It's just so big. It's like having a moving end table all around your house.
I hate to double back to the French Bulldogs, but I think you have an inverse problem there with how compact they are, because they like to sit behind your heel.
Oh,
Like
yeah.
I'll be washing dishes or something in the sink, and it'll like sit like an inch behind my heel, and I go to turn around and I just about trip over the dang dog.
Uh-huh.
But getting back to the Great Dane, yeah, my parents actually had some from when I was probably 3. They said they bred a litter of them, and from what I know, they were pretty nice dogs, just like you said, so dang big.
Yep.
Unfortunately, unless you got any other dog breeds you think are really, really dysfunctional, I was going to mention some cat breeds.
Ooh, let's get into cats.
Luckily, unlike the French Bulldogs, the Savannah cats are blessedly issue free, and so are a lot of cat breeds. There's not a whole lot, they're not as purpose built as dogs, because dogs, you can do just about anything with them if you put enough work into it. A cat is really only good for either aesthetic purposes or for mouse hunting. You can't really do anything else, and they've already got mouse hunting down.
Yes.
So it's only when they went for the aesthetic things that they really got issues. Like, for instance, the Sphinx cat, or the hairless cat, which, contrary to the name, was not made in Egypt, but instead in Toronto in the 60s, so obvious first issue is cold. Also, shockingly, if you live somewhere warm, sunburn. They get it really bad, and because it's a very narrow gene pool stemming from a single short hair animal that had a genetic mutation that left them hairless, they have heart problems like cardiomyopathy. So not a great cat, so to speak, but at least not as glaring as a French Bulldog to me.
That's very true. And I feel like a lot of it with cats is like we had to domesticate dogs. Like it was the process of like working them into our society and making an active effort to integrate them and having to breed them to get them to be domesticated. And historically, cats almost self-domesticated, just bringing themselves into communities and like naturally beginning to live around and with humans. So I feel like that might play a large role in it. And most of the development on their domesticated side kind of arose over time rather than just like through natural selection and the cats living among us. And with dogs, so much of it was trying to be forced in to make them more functional companions.
Yeah, I feel like you hit the nail on the head with that. And moving on from that one point of cats is the one cat breed I think has probably been selected as hard as the French Bulldog with the exact same problem, the Persian, that snub-faced cat.
That's my cat. I have a Persian.
So, what, you weren't satisfied with just breeding French Bulldogs with, well, not breeding, but with the Bulldogs and their snub faces?
I love my cat. It's an amazing cat. And it doesn't have as many actual dire health issues. It can't breathe as well, and most of the cats of the breed can't breathe as well. They grow a lot of hair. They have to be taken care of well. But they aren't just naturally as completely non-functional. Like their lungs just don't shut down. Their allergies aren't as bad. They're more functional, but they're definitely less functional than a normal cat.
Now, here's my question. When I was doing a little bit of research on them, it mentioned something about eye problems.
Oh, yes, they do have eye problems.
Like, what would you say those eye problems are?
Since their faces are so flat, they can't really get around to their eyes with their paws to clean them out. And the way, like the bridge of their nose, I feel almost silly calling it a bridge. Their nose and eyes are both pretty much perfectly flat. But, and because of that, there's just so much of that like eye goop that kind of gets clogged in there because there's so much hair around that area. I think it's just an overproduction issue. And it just kind of wells up all around their eyes. So it kind of looks like they have bags under their eyes all the time.
Oh dear, I never even thought about that with the Persians. Like with the French Bulldogs, the eye gunk they get is insane. Like you peel back one of those wrinkles and it's just a river of gunk. I never even thought about that for a minute with the Persian. Oh dear.
It's gross. It's very gross.
Oh dear. That's so bad. I'm trying to think about that with that long floofy hair and it's the worst thought.
And the hair on that part of their face isn't as long, so it really doesn't gunk the hair up. It's just that part right around their eyes and underneath and between their two eyes really that gets bad.
Oh, that's horrible. And I've blissfully never seen a Persian cat's skull. And now that once this episode's over, I feel like I'm going to have to, purely for the sake of seeing if it's anything like a French Bulldog's.
Of course.
I think those were two of the more dysfunctional cat breeds. Now, is there any others that you can think of? Because cats, I think, on the whole, are just a little better than dogs in terms of the number of breeds that have been built dysfunctional.
I would definitely agree. I can't really think of any cat breeds off the top of my head that would be super bad. I think it's way more common, like when people think of a cat, they just think of a house cat, just a basic domestic cat. It's not really as big of a breed scene as dogs are. So I guess there's not as much room for error, but there definitely is a lot less error.
Exactly. I'm going to move on to a kind of pet that most people think, why would you ever get this? And that's not really domestic, but I feel like they have been almost at least domesticated in the sheer amount of like breeds and morphs that have been created. Pythons, ball pythons specifically, there's a massive market for breeding unique color patterns with them. And the most glaring example of this going just a few steps too far is the spider ball python, which, if you don't know, it has this beautiful little web like pattern across its back, looks real delicate. They're beautiful animals, honestly. I've looked at pictures of them. The only issue is that that specific color mutation is also linked to a gene that destroys them mentally. These snakes cannot balance themselves. They cannot tell up from down. I saw a video of a spider ball python in a box. It's a plastic little box, and its owner tried to feed it a mouse, put a mouse in the box with it. And all this thing did was like flip on its back, almost tie itself into a knot, and then strike the side of the plastic box. Like if
Oh
you
my
hold one
goodness.
in your hand, it will not know up from down. It will be like sitting outward at an angle like snakes do, except it will be sideways or upside down entirely. They are neurologically broken. And the people who breed them call it wobble and call it personality. It's insane because it's a snake. As much as I love them, they do not have personality.
I'm sure some snake person would be very offended by you saying that.
I know. Thank God this is not a snake connoisseur podcast. That these are livestock people who almost guaranteedly either think of snakes as no big deal or actively crush them with shovels when they get the chance.
Yep, I'm on that team.
So I'm not stepping on too many toes. But
I had never really heard of that one before you sent it to me, and it was just wild. And looping back with that, like the traits we breed and affecting other parts of them, to the French Bulldog. I know some people who have bred French Bulldogs around us who would bring them into the clinic, and they would have deaf puppies all the time because they really want
God.
these tricolor Merle French Bulldogs. But a lot of that, like the genes that help with that coloration, are also like synonymous with deafness in the puppies.
I think it's the same with the Aussies, if I'm not mistaken.
It is, yes. So, and I think like just that idea of like these aesthetic traits being so important, we push out so many of these actual quality of life traits that are affecting these animals.
To me, it's like, as much as I would like to have a tricolor Aussie or tricolor French Bulldog or Merle, at the end of the day, if that gene is indefinitely linked with deafness, or in the case of spider ball pythons, where you can't have this pattern you want without risking or guaranteeing those horrible quality of life defects, then I can't ethically say I'd breed for that.
Yes, very true.
Now, thankfully, spider ball pythons are one of the only and most egregious examples of this in the reptile world. But now moving on a bit more to the livestock industry, I'm going to start with poultry. And I bet you're thinking, how could there be an ineffective poultry breed? I mean, there's some like the peacock that are overly extravagant, but that was selected for by nature. Birds are just naturally extravagant animals. Well, thanks to some, if I'm not mistaken, Iranian breeding program that took some 25 years, there's been a thing produced called the naked chicken.
Oh.
It's exactly what it sounds like. Imagine a
Oh
chicken.
no.
Now imagine it without feathers. That's it. It is alien looking. Just those little wings. And a chicken, it looks like a very plump animal until you strip back those feathers. And then it looks like a skeleton with drumsticks. Honestly,
I'm Googling the naked chicken right now. I have to.
you have to. It's necessity.
Okay, it's coming up. These are all. Let's see here. Oh no.
I knew you'd have that reaction.
Oh my god. That's bad.
It's really bad.
When you look at it like this, it does kind of look like a T-Rex. I can see where the whole dinosaurs to bird argument thing comes in. That really does look like a dinosaur. Now, when you were reading this, did you happen to catch the goal of this breeding experiment?
Well, you see, it's got one main purpose. You don't have to pluck it.
Yep.
That's it.
That's it. That makes sense though. If I was a major poultry producer and I was spending a lot on labor plucking chickens, I would want featherless chickens. But I also noticed that breed hasn't seemed to have taken off here in the US. So was there any notable defects that came along with that?
It may seem cheaper than plucking them, but turns out the issues that come with the breed kind of outweigh that, where first off, just like the hairless cat, sunburn is a big issue. But I mean, I was just thinking it's a factory farm. You're not going to deal with sunburn. That's fair. But on top of that, feathers not only keep the chicken warm for when it's too cold, they also help it regulate heat. So it's temperature unsensitive on both sides beyond that. And it gets funnier still, also sadder. The sad part is that these animals are very susceptible to scratches and injuries. Imagine you're in a factory farm cage row setting. This chicken's probably
Oh,
going to
yeah.
get nicked up a lot if it's bare naked.
I could only imagine.
And those cuts are going to increase your vet bill. You're going to get sick
Oh, yeah.
animals, which aren't going to make sense. That's bad business.
Oh, yeah.
And here's the funny part. It's that for birds, feathers aren't just flight, they are plumage to be presented in a mating ritual. If it's a full feathered, vibrant colored male with healthy feathers, that female is going to think this male is healthy and going to be a good father for the next generation of chicks. If a female sees a mangy, skin covered monstrosity, she will not mate with him.
Huh.
So you have these males doing this pointless mating dance of like stretching out their wings and like trying to puff up their chest.
Oh,
None of that works without feathers.
I don't even want to think about this picture I'm looking at doing that. It is a scary idea.
Well, it's happened enough to make this breed possible. So apparently the females aren't that picky, but it's enough that it's an actual issue amongst the breed.
Oh my goodness. I just keep looking at this picture. These things, they're something else. I mean, it really does look like you took a rotisserie chicken out of a grocery store and just stuck it back on legs.
Yeah. Honestly, it is something else.
It really is.
And thankfully, like the spider ball python, there aren't a whole lot of examples of the poultry industry doing this. This is one of those rare instances, not the rule, like you get with dogs.
Of course.
So, unless you have any other bird breeds that you can think of that are real bad off, I'd like to move on to goats.
I'm very happy moving on away from the hairless chicken or the featherless chicken. Ugh.
No, personally, I want to make it my screensaver. If anyone ever breaks into my phone, gets my password, I want this to be the first thing that greets them and for them to drop it in fear and abject terror.
Oh, goodness. Yeah, let's get into goats. I'm excited about this one.
Now, this one isn't as horrible as the hairless rooster or as broken as the French bulldog. They're just hilariously ineffective at goating, and that is the myotonic goat.
Myotonic goat. Give me the rundown on this one.
You probably know them better as fainting goats.
Okay, yep.
Now, I prefer myotonic because that's the actual term. Fainting implies they go unconscious. The reality of it is that they have a disorder called myotonia. It's genetic, that's why the whole breed has it, where whenever they're scared or stressed or even remotely surprised, even a little, their muscles just cramp up and their legs go perfectly locked out and they go stiff and often flop onto their side because it's hard to maintain balance when your legs are completely stiffened. And these animals are, the old legend, the wives' tale around it was that supposedly they were bred that we could throw them in with the rest of your herd, and if a predator ever came along, it would lock up and be the sacrificial lamb. It wouldn't get your good animals. That's just an old wives' tale. The reality of it is that they're just meat goats with a freak mutation that propped up in Tennessee, and some guy thought it was hilarious, so he bred them. And they weren't even like on a farm. It was just feral goats that would run between people's property where somebody first noticed it and propagated the trait because they thought, well, that's interesting.
Oh my goodness. That's
and
wild.
I can't fault him because honestly, it is hilarious.
It really is. And that's a really interesting one, comparing it back to the dogs, because all these issues that are rising in dog breeds are things that we're very selectively breeding in. And this is just something that a natural trait that cropped up by accident that we accentuated far past what it ever should have been.
Yes. And now I can't entirely blame the originator of this breed, because imagine you're bored in the back hills of Tennessee in the 1800s. Life is boring. And then the one thing that brightens your day is that occasionally this feral flock of goats comes to your lawn and you just get to like step out the door, go boo, and they all lock up and fall over.
Oh, I mean, it would make it really easy to catch them and propagate them.
Exactly. My thought is that the worst part of goats is handling them.
Oh yeah,
Problem solved.
problem solved.
Permanently solved. Can't run away. Can't be a pain in the butt. Honestly, I think if I had to ranch goats as a like sustenance farmer, just trying to make a living and feed myself, myotonic is the way I'd go.
It's really effective in a sense. Like it's an interesting example of this faulty trait being functional in a very odd way.
Yes. Though I will say that if you were to ever try and release these to the wild, I would not give them a week.
No, would not be recommended.
A feral cat does just fine. Feral dog, it can survive. Feral
Oh
goat,
yeah.
it's probably fine. Feral myotonic goat,
Oh,
that's like one of my criteria for is this animal dysfunctional? It's if you were to release it or if it got loose, could it survive on its own?
I mean that's very fair. Yeah, French bulldog, no. English bulldog, no.
I wouldn't give
I,
either of them a day if it's
no.
summer. A Great Dane, I could give that a few years before. And
Oh
honestly,
yeah.
like you said, if it's a matter of if it just needs exercise to stay fit, then I'd give Great Danes quite a while.
Oh yeah.
Myotonic goats, not so much.
No.
Yeah, they are not destined for greatness.
At least not natural greatness. Internet fame is one thing. They've definitely got that going for them.
Honestly, just earlier today, just out of sheer, like, I was bored and wanted a bit of a pick me up, I just looked up a compilation of fainting goats, and it is one of the best things I've ever seen.
I mean, it really is entertaining. You can't knock good entertainment.
Like, you feel a little bad for them, and then you just stop and laugh. And I'll say, I went to a myotonic goat ranch just by
Oh,
chance one time out in Texas, and it's hilarious because the adults, they're used to it. They just like they lock up and they just limp along usually because they're
huh.
used to it with all the time they've had. And then
Yeah.
a baby gets surprised by you, and this thing's barely only locked up probably a handful of times ever. Flops over onto its side and is just screaming that goat scream. Can't get up, like trying to move its head, trying to move its legs, just like wailing as its like
Oh my
parents just like
goodness.
hobble off.
I couldn't imagine what that would feel like. Imagine if when you got scared, you just fell to the ground.
Every muscle in your body cramps up.
Oh goodness, that would be
It'd be hell.
that would not be good.
My biggest question is, are there humans with myotonia?
That's a fascinating question. I mean, most genetic mammalian traits span across a couple different species.
Yeah. I'm wondering if there's someone out there in the world who has myotonia, and if they do, are there videos of them fainting? Not fainting, but you get the
Okay, I
idea.
googled it. There are humans with myotonia, but in humans it doesn't phenotypically it doesn't show up as cramping and locking up of muscles. It's just kind of a muscle, like progressive muscle wasting disease.
Well, that's depressing.
It is depressing. I mean, honestly, that's probably less bad for the people that have it than if they did cramp up and fall to the floor screaming every time they got startled.
Yeah, yeah, it's gonna be less disruptive to your life, at least at first.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Okay, I'm gonna throw this to you. If you had to pick between goat myotonia and human myotonia, know that your early life will be good without any myotonia cramp up incidents, but that your later life will be full of wasting slowly
Oh.
versus the goat option where it's very frequent, but it does not impact you on a health level that much at all.
Oh, that's difficult. I think I would need
And screaming optional.
optional. Oh, I'm trying to figure out how bad I'm thinking the locking up would be. Because if it's like full body cramps, like if it feels like I got a Charlie horse all over my body, I couldn't do it. Not a chance.
Here's my thing. I think it's also very different for humans and goats. Goats have a very low center of gravity. Sometimes they can stay up when they cramp up, and even when they don't, it's not that far of a fall. Humans, when we fall hard, and our heads
Oh
are at the
yeah.
very top, meaning they take the brunt of that damage, especially if you're not able to raise your arms and try and like cushion that fall. So I
Oh,
think
that
you're at a
would be
very
bad.
you're at a big head trauma risk injury. Also, you better hope that no one ever surprises you on those stairs.
Yeah. Yeah. I would have to go with muscle wasting. I don't think I could do the cramping up and falling over all the time.
I think if you wore a helmet, some cushioned body armor, that you could make a living as a YouTube star.
That is a fact.
Sup, I'm Chad, Fainting Goat Man. Whenever you scare me, I lock up, and oh dear, I've locked up on TV. Goodbye.
Oh, like those 1920s traveling circuses, the fainting guy.
Yeah.
I could see that 100%.
Over here, we have the 9 foot tall, totally not on stilts Irish giant. And then to your right, we have Chad, the fainting goat man. Look at this freak. Watch. Boo.
Oh my goodness. That's wild.
Yes, we have to keep him out of sight of the dog boy. Otherwise, he tends to bark at him and he gets locked up and it's impossible to move him.
Oh, that was such a strange time in human history. It's one of those things I wish I could go back and see. I'm glad we are no longer exploiting people with disabilities in freak shows, but
You have to wonder what one would have been like.
I know, you just gotta.
I understand that P.T. Barnum was a loathsome human being,
Oh,
but I
yes.
also would have loved to go to one of his shows and to his museum. Because honestly, he had the biggest elephant in the world. He had a slave that he claimed was totally George Washington's nanny, who was absolutely not. He had, shockingly, somehow, a beluga, a live beluga in a tank in his museum. And all I can imagine is, how did this man acquire a beluga, first of all? And second of all, he has a 1920s level of technology. How is he keeping this thing?
I guess if you got that much money and you got the will, there weren't a whole lot of rules. So if you could figure it out, you could do it.
I guess, yeah. That's
If you're the
that's probably
first guy to
way.
put a beluga inside of a museum alive, they can't tell you not to. There wasn't a law against it yet.
The unfortunate thing is that when the museum was burned down, that the beluga whale was inside.
Oh, no.
Oh no, indeed. And I feel so terrible because belugas are such sweet like animals. They love humans. They're very playful. It's like all the worst parts of dolphins have been stripped away, and you just have a wholesome little sea canary.
You don't like dolphins?
Dolphins they're smart, and I'll give them that, but they are occasionally very violent animals. And I will say their big brother orca, I do not trust them as far as I can throw them, which, considering they're a multiple ton sea animal, is not at all.
Oh, dolphins are kind of disgusting creatures. They're very heinous to one another. Very intelligent, though.
Shockingly, dolphins can be racist. It's the damnedest thing.
It really is. I feel like in the coming years, a lot more about aquatic life intelligence is going to come to light with all the experiments and such they're doing.
Yes, and it's fascinating because we're starting to understand dolphin speech to some extent. It's very rudimentary, but I hate to imagine, because dolphins give each other names, individual members of a pod names. So you can imagine they give like objects and things names, right?
Oh, yeah.
Do you think they have dolphin slurs for other species of dolphin?
I would have to imagine. I bet that's one of the most basic levels of language, because whenever they find any ancient sites, there's always some sort of reference to some unliked cultural group in them. So it's as far back as humans have gone, we have been racist, disgusting things. So I can only imagine that's mirrored in dolphins.
Unfortunately, probably yes. But I feel like I'm very sorry. We've lost the lead and kind of dipped back into animal intelligence.
Great topic to go over, though.
Oh, yeah. And hey, what's the point of a podcast if not going down the rabbit hole?
Exactly.
So I'll try and steer us back on course. Something, myotonic goats. Something, would you rather cramp up? Yada, yada, yada. I would do the cramp up one. That's my opinion.
Oh, I couldn't do it.
I just have to go with it because I wouldn't. That thought of just wasting away as you get older.
That's fair.
Also, internet fame.
Very fair. Very true. Real possibility in the modern day and age. Always has to be considered.
Now, thankfully, moving on from the admittedly hilarious myotonic goats, you have Belgian blue cattle. You ever heard of them?
I might have heard of them. I'm not super familiar, though. Give me a rundown.
Okay, if you look them up, you're going to see something that looks like if a bull took Hulk serum. Their myostatin inhibitor gene. It's a myostatin inhibits the growth of muscles. It's what keeps your muscles from growing too much, and you also have something that tells your muscles to grow. That way you don't have no muscles. The point is that without it, your muscles grow without limit, meaning that they look so jacked. And it's
yes, they do.
Really
I just pulled up a picture. I've definitely seen a photo of one of these before.
There's actually a dog out there that has the same mutation. It's not a breed, it's just one individual, but hypothetically you could selectively breed from that individual for it in dogs, but it's specifically used in cattle because it's very efficient, because muscle is easier to build than fat, even though fat tastes better. More muscle means more meat on the plate, more pounds the packing plant, and it's just more economic for them in Europe. So what they do is that they breed cattle like this, and even though it tastes like what our palates would think of as crap. To them, it's just fine. But then again, these are the same people okay with boar taint, so grain of salt,
That's very true. Oh my,
honestly.
some of these are absolutely wild looking.
Yeah, it's insane because they've got muscles bulging like half a foot off their body. And you can only imagine that them trying to walk is a challenge because this muscle gets in the way of motion almost. There's so much of it.
I am honestly surprised that that sort of breed hasn't propped up in the livestock exhibition area in the United States. Because, I mean, it really has a lot of the traits that the livestock industry is moving towards with just that over accentuated muscle and extremely visible like structure. I'm surprised they aren't having a couple blue Belgian shows every now and then in the US.
I can see your point a little there, but I think there's too much tradition in the way things are done for them to try and go so extreme so fast. They try to like sneak it in over a few generations, I think.
That would be very fair.
Kind of like putting a little quinine and everything to get those big frames.
Yep. I could definitely see it affecting the industry in some way, though. Those are absolutely wild to look at.
I was looking through pictures as well just to like try and see what you're seeing, and I actually do have a Belgian blue cattle in a show ring in one picture.
I saw that one with the ladies guiding it around. Oh, and there's another one right there. So it must be a thing somewhere.
It has to be. And I've never been to a show and seen them there, but I guess there is a community around it.
Hopefully they just show them over there in Europe. Maybe they'll keep them over there for another decade or two. Won't mess our beef market up too much.
Honestly, yeah, I'd hate them in the commercial industry. I could maybe accept them in the show industry. Maybe. Because at the end of the day, the show industry, as much as we like to think that it is a model for the commercial industry, I feel like those two things have really diverged in terms of pathways.
Oh, 100%. They're worlds apart at this point. I'm always amused whenever I'm in really old sort of agricultural buildings and you'll see those murals from old fairs and the
Oh.
cows just look like straight rectangles because they were strictly production breeding for the most production quality.
And the trends that you get in the show ring are ridiculous.
Yes.
I swear. If you go to American Royal, they have a Hall of Champions in one part of the building, and I think it's closed off now, but I went in there when I was younger and it was opened up to the public. And I just went back to the 90s, just the 90s. That's not even that long ago, especially considering at the time it was like the 2010s. And I look back to the 90s and the hogs were the skinniest hogs I've ever seen. I've never even seen a hog that skinny at my county fair. And this was the champion at American Royal.
I mean, they're just unrecognizable. I mean, I'm working up here at the stock show in Denver, and I saw some post somebody made during the goat show. It was just a picture from the Goat Grand Drive. I think it was not even like 7 or 8 years ago, and they look like completely different animals.
Oh, yeah. Like we were scrolling through memories. My mom was, and she pulled up a picture of like, I think it might have been Tara or Dylan showing something. And that animal, compared to the stock that we produce today, was almost unrecognizable.
And I think it really reflects like a overarching cultural shift in like everyday life now. Everything has started to change so much more and more, so much more quickly. Our attention spans are getting shorter. We want something new all the time. And every industry is being forced into rapid change. And I think the livestock industry has just fell subject to that as well. There are so many people who are just attempting to like put this rapid change into it as everything else is changing so rapidly with the improving technology and just cultural shifts that are happening so quickly. I think it's just a reflection of the same aspect.
I think you got a point there. Luckily, the Belgian blue cattle on a whole, as far as I can tell, the only thing inhibiting them is just the amount of motion they're able to achieve as they walk around, which, once again, just like the myotonic in nature would really screw them over, but luckily it
Yes,
doesn't have any too immediate health effects, especially since most of them only make it to slaughter weight.
very true. And I feel like a lot of the traits like that aren't as much of a hindrance. I mean, when we look at them from a natural perspective, but in the environment that they exist in, if they live in a feedlot and they live to the age of that point that they're going to be slaughtered, the limited mobility isn't really hindering them in the life that they will live.
Exactly. Like it just needs to be able to walk from where it sleeps to where it eats to where it sleeps again, and then eventually onto the packing plant truck. That's all it needs to do. Now, I will say, in the same vein as the Belgian blue cattle, is the Pietrin hog. Have you ever seen these?
The what hog?
The Pietrin. It's spelled like pie train. It's another European fad.
Of course it is.
Now, similar to the Belgian blue, they're all about muscle. They don't have it so extreme as that they miss a myostatin gene or anything like that, but they're insanely well muscled. They did have actually a spike of popularity in the American show ring for a while. I learned that from my skillathon coach, Eric Fugate. He taught me a lot about the hog industry I never knew, but he taught me they had a bit of a popularity spike. But the thing about them is that they taste god awful because, once again, just like the Belgian Blue, there is no fat. It's almost all muscle, meaning no marbling, meaning no flavor.
I just pulled up a picture of one of these too, and this one's also rancid to look at. Oh my goodness.
And they're all the fat in Europe, and they're all boars, and they're all built like, for lack of any non-vulgar terms, they're built like brick shit houses.
They really are. Oh my
It's
God.
bizarre, honestly. And I could never even imagine what that would taste like.
No, it would be so tough.
Yeah, I would not like to ever try that, but the Europeans, I guess, are a different breed of human.
I guess so. You'd have to leave that thing in the crock pot for like a week if you wanted to chew it up.
Yeah, they're insane looking hogs. And just like the Pietrin, the muscle can restrict their mobility a bit. But the
Of
biggest
course.
issue isn't that. It's that coming with that muscle is an extreme susceptibility to porcine stress syndrome, which in regular show hogs, people see it sometimes, where the hog, if it's enough stress or enough heat or enough something or other, it often takes a lot to push them to that point. They'll turn purple and keel over. And honestly, it takes a lot of work to achieve that in a hog. You really have to be pushing that thing past its limit. Pietrin hogs, not so much. Their limit's
Not so much.
pretty low bar for turning purple and dying.
I'm surprised. So is that strictly a swine issue? Because I'm surprised that sort of thing doesn't like pop up with the Belgian blue cattle in the same vein.
I think it's just a hog thing because all breeds of hog can, I believe, get it if you push them far enough. And really, any animal could be stressed to death, but I think hogs are just more susceptible as a species, and this breed is more susceptible within that already susceptible species.
Yes.
Now, this is just hearsay from a hog person that you could walk them out of the pen and they start turning purple.
Oh.
Like I said, hearsay. I have nothing to base it on. I've not raised Pietrins. I have showed hogs all of once or twice in my life. So don't take me as an expert opinion here.
No, I could definitely see it though. So, and they are more of a white pattern breed. And I mean, I've shown some white hogs before, and it does not take them much to start getting pink or red. And if they were walking up that bad, I bet one of those things could turn purple pretty quick.
Yeah. So all in all, Europeans, they're an odd bunch, I will say, with their selection. They like horse
really
meat, snail meat, and apparently boar taint. And they want to be able to chew on their meat for a good couple hours.
I mean, I guess you don't have to eat as much. If you're chewing on it that long, you get full.
You know, you're right. It's like chewing gum. You don't need to constantly be shoveling candy in your mouth. You just got to chew on this one same piece forever. I'm sure it might lose the taste it had in the first 30 seconds, but as long as you're chewing it, you're not thinking about the fact that you don't have more.
I bet these Pietrins and Belgian Blues don't have a whole lot of taste to them.
Nope.
Oh my goodness. Those are rough.
Yeah, that's real bad. But on a more American note, if I'm not mistaken, we're going to move on to the sheep, the final of the four main show species. And I'll say, I did not find any glaring issues with the sheep. They didn't have a muscle cramping disorder. I couldn't find one that was extremely muscled in the sense like the Belgian Blue or the Pietrin. Honestly, sheep as a breed don't have any one breed that really stands out as bad. I think personally sheep are the dumbest livestock species by a country mile.
I would agree. 100%.
Like a goat, you have feral goats in the wild all the time. Goat gets out, it can survive just about anywhere there's food for it to eat.
Yes.
Sheep, you do not get many feral sheep. They don't last long. And there's some range sheep out there, but only with the explicit protection of ranchers constantly guarding over them because they are dumb.
I also don't know of a specific breed of sheep with a large genetic deformity or breed issue, but I will say I've noticed and had speaking to a couple different people in the industry over the past couple of years, dwarfism is starting to become an issue in the market industry with lambs due to so much similar genetics that are being passed around, and so many high quality animals ended up with the gene that it just kept getting bred in because they couldn't take the time to breed it out or lose the money to because so much of the good stock had the gene in it. And I think that's kind of emblematic of a lot of the issues we talked about prior It's something that's coming along and causing problems, but people aren't dealing with it due to the fact that it's more profitable just to push past it. And the ones that come out dwarfs, you just don't show them to anybody.
I think you got a real good point there. The main one I was thinking about with sheep, just the closest I could get to a specific breed problem was the Suffolks. And Suffolks, their biggest deal is that they are incredibly susceptible to spider lamb, where the lambs come out and they've got these splayed out legs. They just don't last. The bones don't form right.
Yes, yes.
And they might last a little while, but they're just going to fade on you eventually.
It's very, very odd.
So, all in all, sheep, not that bad, but they're getting real bad about not weeding out specific bad genetic traits when they crop up.
Yes.
And I think that's a main problem of almost all domestic breeds nowadays, is that people are not going to take the time to weed out the problem genetic animals because they're just trying to pursue that one trait so vehemently that they're okay making those sacrifices. And down the line, that really damages the breed. Like I talked to my chemistry teacher, who is a true dog lover and a connoisseur of fine dogs, if you will. And she loves her German Shepherds, like her favorite breed, hands down. But she just got so disheartened when she saw the industry turn towards trying to breed those dwarf animals, which had all kinds of health problems.
Yes. And currently, it seems like that's the direction that the entire domestic dog industry is going. Everything's getting smaller. It's just the new niche breeds are the same breeds we've had. They're just minis. And so many more health problems can come along with when shrinking those animals down like that.
And I feel like it's possible to breed animals on a small scale. It's just a matter of time and weeding out the issues as they crop up. Because I look at something like a Chihuahua. A Chihuahua is, now I have not done a expert level of research on them. You probably know more about them than I do. But as far as I know, you don't see many problems from the size they have, correct?
Not a whole lot, really. And most of the problems they have aren't specifically size-based. There weren't a whole lot of Chihuahuas in the North Louisiana area I worked at the vet clinic at.
Yeah, imagine.
Not Chihuahua people, believe it or not. But the ones we saw, I mean, generally they would be healthier animals. They are very mean, naturally angry animals, without a doubt. But health-wise, like, I mean, they're very small, so there's not too much pressure, and they have a good enough skeleton to support it. I mean, just getting kicked, like hit by anything, if you accidentally step on them, you could break any part of their body, and because everything's so fragile just from them being that small. But on a pure functionality basis, they really haven't lost that much from their small size.
Yeah, I think it's a matter of the Chihuahua. The Chihuahua is a very old breed as far as I know historically, like goes back to the Aztec and Native American peoples.
Very old breed.
The bloodline was watered down a lot when Europeans arrived and brought in their dogs, but still, that breed already had the scaffolding to be a small breed. Lots of work and time was put into it in an environment where defects could not be accepted, as the animal probably wouldn't last long.
Yes.
If it couldn't survive in this, admittedly, Stone Age civilization. Whereas the dogs of today, you can get away with cutting corners in the breeding process of making that quick profit, or just saying, it's fine, I'll just take it to the vet with like a French bulldog. You can get away with having an animal that needs a C-section almost every single birth, because we live in a time where you can achieve that. If you were to try and give somebody a French bulldog in a third world country, it wouldn't make it past a single generation.
No. And I think that brings up a fascinating, like a really good synopsis of the point. Just because we can do it doesn't mean we should do it.
Yes.
We have the ability and the medical know-how to keep these animals alive and breed them and like breed in the traits we want to. It's the question of whether or not we should be doing that.
That is a great way to summarize that. And I'm going to try and jump to the show ring just a little, but there's things like traits like a fluffy steer. It's not especially impractical. It's just there's no reason for it unless you're trying to breed cattle up near the Arctic Circle. A Scottish Highland, I can understand that. It is meant to exist somewhere where you could expect snow just about up to their shoulders. But in the show ring, when I see a steer walk out with more fluff to it than a teddy bear, I know the only reason that exists is not for any functional purpose besides the fact that a good trimmer can essentially make a topiary of this thing's hair to make it look like a good animal.
Mm. Oh, see, that's a fascinating point, and bringing that into the livestock industry and so many of these different traits, and like the idea of these perfect animals we have now, putting all this hair on them so we can sculpt them like we're making a out of marble or something. And these past couple of days, most of the show cattle are heading out now. Cattle Grand Drive was today, and the yaks and the bison have started to move in. And I saw some of them walking earlier, and one of the other photographers with me said something. They're like, "Those things just look so structurally incorrect." And I was like, "Well, oh, they do, they do." And I thought about it, I was like, but they really don't. That's the perfect structure for the environment that
Exactly.
nature crafted for them. That's what those are supposed to look like. We're messing it up. We're doing things wrong.
Exactly. What's in the show ring is not built for outdoor survival. And it's funny to
No.
me because my father brought me on for an episode on like animal structural soundness. And the clearest thing to me is most animals in nature are incredibly sound because it's about energy efficiency and speed and all of that. And the show ring, and even in the commercial industry, it's not about having a sound animal. It's like we mentioned earlier with that Belgian blue or Pietron hog. You can pile as much muscle as you want on there, make them as opened up, as broad, as hobbling as you want, as long as it can go from the feed bunk to where it sleeps to the packing plant.
Mm-hmm. It's all about commercial possibilities. Like, how much meat can you get off the animal?
Exactly. Now, I will say that we have to extend some grace to all domestic species because you brought up a great point earlier to me when we were thinking about this topic, the Russian fox domestication experiment.
I
I'll
It's one of my
yeah,
favorites, honestly.
it's a really fascinating project. Now, I will admit I'll give a synopsis of the experiment just to catch the listeners up on it. And I will say, going forward, it is a Russian experiment that was started all the way back in the 50s or 60s. And I will admit, I am not a big fan of Russia right now for very obvious geopolitical reasons. But
I don't think they were much better in the 50s or 60s.
yeah, possibly as bad, if not worse. But I will say
I would definitely say worse.
the research that was conducted by this Fox experiment is invaluable to our understanding of how domestication works. So
100%.
to break it down fast and simple, a guy who I gotta find his name because it was a very Russian name. Actually, his name, yes, I've got it here. Never mind. Just called him the founder. So
Okay.
we'll just call him that. The founder of this experiment, he wanted to see if there were side effects of domestication because he thought, okay, look at a wolf, now look at a dog. Did we really need to give the dog some of these traits to make them domestic? Why do dogs have shorter muzzles? Why do dogs have floppy ears? Why do dogs have multicolored coats? Did we need to do that for domestication? So why do these traits exist? So he decided, I'll domesticate a species and I'll see what the results are. What traits have to be there in the process of domestication? Because here's the thing, a animal's like tameness or predisposition to be calm around humans is a trait just the same as muscle growth or soundness. It's something you can breed for, and that when breeding for it, there are associated traits that come with it. And he found that as he bred these foxes for tameness and very quickly became very successful because he'd only breed the top 10% tamest animals of every generation. And within 6 generations, he had to make up a new category out of the 3 he'd established for determining how tame they were, ranging from not tame at all, still aggressive, to almost dog like in the sense that it would actively seek out human interaction. And this experiment has been going on since the 50s or 60s. It's still going on today. And the foxes they've produced are truly domestic animals. They're not a dog because a fox being domesticated is no more a dog than a cat being domesticated is a dog. They act differently than a dog, but they're similar in the fact that you can take one of these foxes they've produced, never handle it, and that's their experiment criteria. They'll never handle it up to 2 months of age, plop it in a room with a human, see how much time it wants to spend with the human. That's the recording criteria. And it's very successful. And there have been experiments done in the US with foxes brought or bought from the experiment to see if this was all just bunk or not. And sure enough, they were correct that this domesticated fox, unlike even a tamed wild fox, will want to seek out interaction with humans it's never even seen before, just like a dog.
It is very fascinating.
In the process, the population of foxes all picked up those domestic animal traits: floppy ears, smaller skulls, different tail. Like a dog's tail, it curves upwards instead of laying down like a fox's. Smaller teeth, patchy coat, that isn't really uniform. So he published a theory, and it's been disputed a lot in recent times, that these traits are just side effects of breeding for tameness, just like that spider ball python's wobble is a side effect of breeding it for that color pattern. That these are things that intrinsically come with the animal, and that if we want to tame something, we're automatically going to make it a bit impractical, because having a multicolored coat, floppy ears, smaller teeth, those are all impractical features for a wild predator like a dog or a fox.
Very much so. And the thing that I like, there's so many questions that can be asked looking at the experiment. Because, I mean, right off the bat, you can look at they're bringing the top 10%. The only trait they're breeding for is domestication. If they reran the experiment from the get go and they said, we're only going to take the overlapping 10% of the 10% most domestic and the 10% most naturally fox looking, how much longer would it take to domesticate them, keeping those natural traits in there? I think that would be a fascinating experiment in itself, but it really highlights, I think, our lack of understanding of so much of this, like just how parts of genetics and traits can affect one another without even directly meaning to.
I think that's a great description of, honestly, the results of the experiment. And I really would like to see that as well, now that you mention it, trying to retain practical, traditional fox traits while also breeding for tameness. But yes, we've covered most of the topics I was trying to get at today. Is there anything else you feel like we should cover in terms of breed domestication and impractical breeds?
I think that's most of it. I mean, we hit the docket pretty hard. Biggest one definitely is in the domestic dog industry. There's just so much wild stuff, and it's a purely aesthetically focused industry. So many negative traits are just thrown to the wayside in the look of breeding. But it definitely crops itself up in the livestock industry and in other sorts of industries. It's, I think, something that breeders should attempt to be more mindful of, just to create more functional animals, whether it's a production animal or a domestic animal or whatever it may be.
I feel like that is a really great thesis for this episode. And I will continue attempting to steer my mother away from breeding Frenchies, or even if she does, to try and bring some muzzle into them, for the love of God.
But see, wouldn't it look so weird, a French bulldog with a big long muzzle?
Oh, here's the thing, really quick, before the episode ends, look up retro pug.
Retro pug.
Like, you think of a pug, and then this is just a pug they've bred with a Jack Russell Terrier to put some muzzle on it.
I do love Jack Russell Terriers. Oh my goodness.
Fascinating, isn't it?
They aren't ugly dogs.
Yeah. My mom, she thinks, no, they're muttly.
They look way more functional.
Now, to me, I agree with you. I think that, does it have as much muzzle as a wolf? Of course not. Does it have enough to survive outside on a sunny day? 100%.
I mean, not even
that is a functional animal with a high quality of life.
Yes. Not even to the survive outside extent. It has enough muzzle not to constantly choke on its own snot.
Yeah, we have a dog whose lymph nodes turned inside out from the vacuum created simply by trying to breathe.
That's
and
wild.
Those lymph nodes turned inside out and clogged up its airway even more.
Oh my goodness.
And then had to be removed by the vet. And while they were at it, they cut off some of the nose to open up the airways a little more too.
That was a good idea.
And he's the most snaggle-toothed bulldog ever. Well, I say he's the most, but he's just the worst I've seen. He looks like a British dental plan.
Oh no. We're really dogging down on the Europeans today.
Nah, they're probably only, 5% of the listener base. It's fine.
It's fine.
They can come across the pond if they really want to get me.
Okay, I Googled a French Bulldog and Jack Russell cross. Okay, these aren't as good as the retro pug. These are a little funky looking.
I did not know they existed.
Oh, every breed of dog, every cross exists. If you Google it, that is one thing I did learn working at the vet clinic. If you could think for it to be possible, somebody's done it and put it on the internet.
Tell me, have you ever heard of a Shedane Dane?
Shedane Dane? What is that?
It is a Chihuahua and a Great Dane.
Yes, I have heard of those. I haven't seen one in forever. Let me look up a picture.
They're not as abominable as you'd imagine, but the fact that it can happen is a fascinating example of just what can be considered a species still on a genetic level to these animals.
Okay. And And that's another thing I think that's coming up so much in the domestic industry is the possibilities that have been opened up through artificial insemination and C-sections and everything of the sort. The dogs never have to look at each other to have puppies. If you can
Yeah.
imagine it happening, a vet can make it happen. And I think that's opened up a lot of doors that could lead the domestic dog industry to very dark places.
But I feel like it opens so much opportunity for good. If you had a
Oh,
population of Great Danes in Massachusetts, you could get semen from a sire in Denmark to spice up your gene pool at any time you needed. Hell, if you wanted to bring in genetics from a pure mutt, you could if you wanted to. And you could completely just custom tailor this family tree, this lineage, like a bonsai tree, making it perfect, making it without defect. Maybe it wouldn't be as aesthetic as you wished, but you could make the healthiest dog ever. If someone
oh
put their mind to
yes.
it, they could probably breed a dog with a 20-year lifespan on average if they just
Oh yeah.
really put work into it.
And I think that's something that's highlighted more in the livestock industry than in any other industry. I think we have really gotten ahead of the game in terms of animal production when we look at artificial insemination and very selective trait breeding. Like if you take the past 5 years of any major market species, it could be looked at as a model to derive the traits you want from a specific species. And I mean, there's just so much, like, think of semen sales, how strange that would have sounded to somebody 60 years ago. But now
It
the
would have
top
been
market
bizarre.
producers, yeah, the genetics are going everywhere. Everything's getting so much more spread out and kind of becoming more uniform almost to a degree because they're so available.
Yeah. And I will say that's the one reason I can support having breeds, individual breeds, is that sometimes you need those reserves of traits to draw upon. But I feel like sometimes there's other breeds like the French Bulldog where I can't think of one good trait to draw from that dog breed.
That is a fact.
A Belgian Blue, maybe I need more feed efficiency because muscle gains faster than fat. French Bulldog, I you could give me a week and I couldn't come up with one good thing you could bring to the table.
Oh,
Unfortunately,
yeah.
I'm slandering the dogs in the next room over that have blessedly not barked all podcast recording, but it's the honest truth.
It's very kind of them.
Yes, it is. They're not as kind to my dad whenever he's recording. You might be able to hear them in the background every once in a while.
I'll have to listen for that.
But yes, thank you very much for coming on the episode today. And I feel like we
Oh,
had
it
a
was
great talk about
spectacular.
the entire
Yes.
topic of Impractical Breeds. I was almost afraid that we weren't going to make that much time. I was going to think, oh, what could we possibly talk about? We just say, oh, here's a breed, here's what's wrong, done. But I feel like we got into some really good conversation.
Oh, I do too. Lots of interesting, getting in there, talking, like breaking it apart a little bit. It really is a fascinating topic with a lot of different layers. And every industry that the issues pop up in, they crop up for different reasons. So there's just so much to look into and consider, especially from a breeding perspective.
Yes. And I think that might be all for the episode today. I'd like to thank all of you so much for listening to the second episode of Beyond the Realm. I'm sorry that it might have taken a little while to come out, but I'm going to try to shoot for a little more regular upload schedule if I do more episodes than this, which I truly hope to. And on that topic, I would love to hear more suggestions from you guys about what I should cover, whether it's the domestication of a species of livestock, whether it's a specific breed's history, anything like that. Even just crazy stuff. Say you want an episode on aliens where my dad comes on and we debate for an hour. But all in all, I'd like to say thank you again, Jack, for being such a great guest and a great person to talk to about this topic.
Thank you so much for having me on. You're going to have to bring me back if we get into the aliens, though. I could talk about that for hours.
I would love to, and I would love to have somebody in the same podcast with me if I have to exist on that recording with my dad for an hour because it's going to be just an endless loop because we've had this argument a million and one times. We need some fresh blood here. Thank you all so much for listening. This has been Beyond the Realm with Chase Hummel and our guest, Jack Hoyle.